All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining the book launch of Layman Pascal's new book, Sex, Death, and the Occult. Thank you, Layman, for being here and doing this project with us. So just a couple of words before we started. Parallax Publishing just recently, and it was kind of a addition to the podcasting that we already did and the courses that we already did. But because we also thought that books are still like a major technology, like I think even still the most important technology, like media technology that we have, that we extend, the Parallax universe and add like a publishing branch. And so I think Layman's book, this is not Layman's book, but we're doing some magic here. So it is a stand-in for Layman's book. Um, so is it, I think, the fourth in the series that we're doing, and these books that we're trying to do are kind of verging at the edge of chaos between order and chaos, and try to look for something new in philosophy and spirituality, but also in philosophy. So, and Layman's book, I asked Layman to do this book because we were doing a course on sex, death, and the occult, and that went so well that I thought it could be a great book if we edit it a little bit and if we extend the sections a little bit. And so we used some AI to create a rough draft, and then I gave it to Layman, and he created that fantastic book as a companion piece, but also as one of the first books that tried to ask the question: how could a meta-modern spirituality like actually look like? What are the new impulses that we find here? And so this is the book, Sex, Death, and the Occult, trying to reach into the history of magic and the occult, but also venturing kind of into the unknown and trying to find some new information, some new stuff in there. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, Layman. Thanks for doing this book.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. This is so that was a sigil. But for what? What spell could I possibly be casting? Happily, I don't know. And also, happy solstice, everyone. Thank you to Tom and Parallax for continuing their tradition of peculiar experiments at the edge of chaos with this event. Seems to me this event is symbolic. It might not even really be happening. It's a seed between realities in the same way that the course and the book are seeds. Very small things that might grow into part of an important new garden, a new forest of transrational communities that the world needs. So what we're doing is not straightforward. It's actually very strange. Yesterday, I was feeling into the future, which is this event now, and I got very excited and I spoke aloud to an oak tree. I said to the oak tree, there are 7 oak mists. I do not expect a cigar from Tony. We all elucidate the river stones, and no one asphyxiates our caterpillars anymore. And frankly, it was the anymore that I found most inspiring, 1156. So these are messages from a part of myself that is unknown to me. It's occult, it's hidden, and yet it can say things. Perhaps it can even do things. There are ways of knowing and doing whose patterns cannot be compressed into standard knowledge or everyday consciousness. When I say that the slogan for this very interesting book is "Make occultism occult again," I mean that there needs to be part of our new wisdom communities, our new transformational and developmental and regenerative networks, part of them that explores the need to cultivate the unknown personality and its unknown skills, the other of the self, the hidden wisdom of our ancestors, past and future ancestors, who have been trying to grow magical bodies within themselves, individually and in community. And there are symbols and words and tricks for all that I think we need to learn. We need to learn the principles beneath occult knowledge. And we then have to invent our own ways of saying it and experimenting with it. All of that I call Zagic. And if we know exactly what we're talking about here, then we're not doing it right. This is a very interesting book, which was originally about why I love Hitler and underage boys. Tom asked me to say that as part of the promotion for this. Anyway, this book transcribes, modifies, and adds to a course, which was itself a combination of a group magical working and an education of the subconscious mind around principles of magic and hermeticism, and also a practice arena for skills involving the building of the will, communication with hidden agency, active imagination, half-conscious sense-making, and it organized itself around the first 6 tarot cards. It was themed around sex and death because the principles of biopsychological arousal and also surrender and constraint and closing, Eros and Thanatos, Martito and Libido, are underlying practical mechanisms for most occult work. The book is also about transformation. Magic is kind of the art of transformation. And I'm drawing a close connection in all of this stuff between transsexual, transrational, transgender, transpersonal, and ultimately transontological agency. Even though we used AI for some of the phases of this, it's such a peculiar book. I would say this is something AI can't write. And we should be looking forward to creating very strange hybrids that AI cannot by itself create, because it's gaining the ability to create almost everything else. So I thought we would, maybe I would read from one of the more straightforward and rigorous sections, an excerpt from the appendix I call The Use and Abuse of Hermetic Lineages, which will tell an alternative story about who occultists are and what they've been doing for hundreds and thousands of years. And after that, we can talk. And also maybe at the end, we'll get a little taste of the Integral for Idiots course that starts in a few weeks. So strap in, maybe close your eyes. This will be a bit rigorous, and I'll talk for a little while. Over the last several hundred years, there's been an outrageous explosion of printed books, capitalism, and international travel. In this so-called modern environment, many of the things that formerly had the intense glamour of a weird subculture now seem like completely ordinary niches of consumer choice. Witchcraft is a normalized subgenre of cinema and sexy Halloween costumes. Gothic spookiness and digital new age vision boards are just another thread in the tapestry of the global market economy. In this new environment, the underground alchemical sages and the covert covens of the 16th century would be shocked to see occult bookstores in public places or websites dedicated to forbidden hermetic wisdom. Our forebearers might even consider all of this to be wildly inauthentic by virtue of the fact that it is now being processed and undertaken in the effective arena of the conventional social world. But despite their potential hesitancy about throwing ancient pearls to the unprepared swine of the marketplace, we can also read into this moment as an astonishing new opportunity to reintegrate the esoteric mimetic streams into the general project of civilization. This could be win-win. So who are these people? What secret knowledge, or at least which attitudes and shared signifiers, have they been preserving as tools around which to constellate communities of shared practice and psychological development? Modern Western occult lineages typically trace themselves back to the legendary figure of Thoth Hermes Trismegistus. Thoth Hermes Trismegistus, Thoth Hermes Trismegistus. You have to repeat it 3 times because his name means thrice great, which is not too different than Eastern descriptions of the 3 bodies of the Buddha. Thoth Hermes Trismegistus is regarded as the avataric saint or living human divine hybrid of the ancient Egyptian epoch, the legendary great magus of his time. Now, the notion of a magus, which is central to occult lineages, is the epitome of a developmental ranking system that attempts to clarify different degrees of magical self-development, or the embodied, affective, agentic, imaginary, and participatory form of reason and wisdom. Many ambiguities and disagreements are involved when we start to talk about and ask who is a magus. Regardless of this uncertainty, the existence of such a concept, that of a rank-like position of great magician, tells us that we are inspecting an ethos in which intergenerational transcultural initiatory networks were involved in the explicit concept of developmental degrees of depth and understanding and transformation of worldview, i.e., that there is a network of people who are inheriting, working with, encoding, and passing on the semantic infrastructure of a subculture in which human beings can make inner progress in a stage-like or phase-like manner. These transformations, which are often mapped by Kabbalistic diagrams that came in use widely as lineages shorthand for many things, do not proceed within the ordinary external person. It's not a matter of getting promoted at work or passing an exam through memorization. The implication is that one moves on an inner journey between different thematic centers, subtle realms, psychological functions, or paradigmatic ways of experiencing self and world. Many types of diagrams survive from different epochs in which small networks of people gathered to map an expanded multidimensional phenomenology. Often these maps began very idiosyncratically and were later standardized and reduced to the elements that were found to be interpersonally useful. In Europe, after the Roman Empire, there was a mixture of Egyptian, Greek, Jewish, Zoroastrian, Gnostic, Christian, and Celtic, with a limited influence of India and China as well, which congealed into a type of aesthetics and cultural artifacts associated with the classical age of Western esoteric societies. The traditions of Hebrew mysticism were notably prominent, owing to the mixture of anti-Semitic persecution, which led subversive international occult networks to sometimes be a place of refuge for Jewish and other marginalized types, as well as widespread Jewish training in the deep study and decoding of texts. Hidden patterns and cryptic laws were then well within their standard wheelhouse, and this may have led to the standardization of Kabbalah and the general use of Sephiroth or interlinked spheres as a way of formalizing the intuitive and visionary experiences of occult experimenters. Thus, the occult developmental journey was often characterized as proceeding through different phenomenological spheres. Competence in these different types of vibes and sense-making styles was believed to correlate to maturational human growth, leading, of course, to the system in which various grades were assigned to individuals as they unfolded their experiential knowledge of these 10 domains. Under the correct conditions, this proves very practical. The combination of study and personal pondering and altered state practice and peer dialogue slowly accumulates into an internal readiness for the next phase of growth. This was recognized by the people who had gone through it before and became consecrated by the social psychotechnology of immersive ritual enactment. When this system works well, it might be the closest historical instantiation to the types of developmental psychology currently presented as spiral dynamics, integral theory, stages models, hierarchical complexity, etc. But often it does not work as intended. Why not? Well, this sort of graded occult lineage is eminently hackable. This is also something we have to learn from. The Achilles heel of secret pro-developmental organizations is that their significance of grade shifts over time moves from recognizing inner transformation to a kind of in-group promotion system. Seniority and heredity, and ultimately cash, replace the developmental value of the holarchic structural phases. So you ultimately get the children of noble families wanting to be automatically recognized as high-ranking Freemasons. An indulgent customer service orientation enters. Groups who have arranged certain kinds of status with government authorities end up skewing their criteria to serve the political needs of the moment, and administrators replace sages. Brash young intellectuals who burn through the prerequisites of many levels as if they were trying to earn merit badges show up. You get bureaucratic internal politics, where it would be unseemly for the legal head of the order not to be given the highest possible accolades and grade of consciousness. and you get a politically enforced general market system whereby the need for resources forces these ancient organizations to start selling ranks. All of which means that the whole vibe becomes increasingly uninteresting to the next generation of wisdom rebels and occult explorers. Now, this is not a problem unique to occult lineages. Obviously, Harvard and Oxford are taking a lot of cash for credentials given to wealthy families who end up running the government, but nonetheless, it is still a tragic and absurd problem. Right? It's like being able to purchase sainthood from the Vatican, which has occurred at times. But all of this undermines the very thing we hope that degrees of wisdom and existential development are suggesting. The occult historian Alan Greenfield told me that in his opinion, the decay of the grade system is pretty much the primary driver of the late 20th century collapse of the dignity and effectiveness of the inherited esoteric lineages. Now, in general, the aspirant initiate who is embedded in a stable shamanic culture was probably selected for certain traits indicating high interest and high ability in imaginal and explicitly transjective circumstances. But they become over time in danger of being replaced by anybody who wants in or who thinks they're supposed to be a part of this or who can get a grade by any means. This is the problem of intergenerational esoteric lineages under the condition of game-age civilization. We have to take this corruption seriously, but it should not prevent us from exploring the dynamics of a healthy, idealized, contemporary version of how these groups entangle personal development with social organization. Climbing this tree, ascending through the spheres, so to speak, the initiate is theoretically unfolding into a more mature experiential knowledge of the inner planes, which is to say the embodied cognition of imaginal, participatory, transdisciplinarity, and nonlinearity. Turning on, tuning in, but then to quote Dr. Leary, you still have to drop out. So the prepared or the unprepared initiate moving through this process ultimately faces the abyss, the monstrous. The first set of grades involving general occult learning, skill, building, and experience of altered states and realms is separated by an experience or phase that is very uncomfortable and disorienting from its highest possibilities. This abyss must be traversed so that your identity can stably begin to include the three interwoven grades that they call above the abyss, non-dual or trans-dual grades on a Kabbalistic diagram. These grades beyond the treacherous abyss are given as Master of the Temple, Magus, and Ipsissimus. And I remember as though I were singing the American children's song about the state of Mississippi, IPSISSIMUS, Ipsissimus. These three supernal grades can be interpreted in very moderate or very majestic terms. Speaking moderately, you could probably go out on the streets of your own city tonight and with a little bit of gumption lay your hand on an official 94th degree Ipsissimus or a Chartreuse Phoenix Master of the Temple. All sorts of people are given or give themselves variations of these official grades for various reasons. And just because that sounds stupid does not mean that many of the people involved in such pageantry are not deep, sophisticated, rational, and intuitive, construct-aware, and subtly sensitive people. Yet there is also a sense in which they describe specific, these grades I mean, specific and quite radical mutations of human consciousness, if consciousness is even the correct word. So in the more grandiose sense, the master of the temple should be both enlightened and capable of creative, viable new temples, the production of sects and movements. The grade of Magus is reserved for a small handful of great messianic magicians, supra-individuals who are believed to have spiritually directed the course of the eons, Christs and Buddhas and Mohammeds and Krishnas and Hermeses. These are illuminated saints relative to an epoch of human civilization. And then the Ipsissimus goes beyond even that exalted condition, vanishes, passes back through themselves, forgets their enlightenment while still embodying it, has their awakening superseded by an active subconscious degree of cosmic agency that no longer even tells their mind what's happening. Anyone who puts some real time and energy into meditation practice will also recognize that this has similarities to the phases that anyone goes through in the course of a single intense sitting. Now, if you're versed in the lives or the propaganda of great realizers, you might have heard claims about enlightened teachers who become heroically enlightened after some years of enlightenment. These claims can be hard to understand, since for most people, the very notion of awakening, taken seriously, suggests a state so incredible that going beyond it is a virtually meaningless concept. And yet I believe the notion of the ipsissimus points to one of the unique imaginal features of occult approaches to wisdom in the context of the monstrous. I refer to this as the secret chiefs problem. The phrase secret chiefs should not be taken to be exclusively male or tribal. We can put those conventional associations aside for the moment. I use the term as an homage to a goofy 19th century slang term that emerged in connection with European occultism. It's one of those few terms that point to the notion of an alternative spiritual development track. In mainstream, superficially surface-facing wisdom traditions, there's generally postulated or imagined a spiritual and developmental hierarchy that terminates in the apex figure of a compassionate Buddha, Bodhisattva, or Christ. Such a figure, whether immaculately born or cultivated through years of practice, is imbued with deep humility and omniscience. And more than that, they are easily recognized by a characteristic aura of loving kindness that exudes from them in all directions. We've all seen the old paintings. Not even the little kids can fail to recognize the superlative condition of this being. The weight of the world slips from your heart in their presence, and her fierce hug melts you into an infinite embrace of unconditional consciousness. That is good stuff if you can get it, and it has 3 issues as well. Firstly, it forecloses our imagination in terms of the potential diversity of spiritual mutations. Secondly, it presents only a slice of human affect, and we wonder where the rest of their emotional complexity went. And thirdly, it creates an aspirational monoculture of religious wisdom seeking in which people subconsciously posture to appear more tranquil, loving, and frankly inhuman. Shadow work and inclusive self-inspection get lost in the relatively superficial and often political attempt to portray oneself as perfect in this narrow, culturally reinforced sense, which in turn breeds a secret monstrosity. Repressed elements return to the back rooms and haunt and undermine the community. And even the spiritual alpha in such a system is seemingly not allowed to cry or get angry or make mistakes or admit that he stupidly groped someone without the appropriate go-ahead signals. We see the shadow side of wisdom communities suppressed and hidden, even where there is an open conversation within those communities about the need to integrate shadow. And part of the reason for these frequently observed outcomes in cults, religions, and intentional communities is that the projected image of the avataric, all-completing saint is given to us in a narrow and fixed form as purely benevolent, socially benign, obvious, and easily recognized, all positive and error-free. In magical communities, however, where the shadow elements are more explicitly indicated, even to the point of having open discussions about right and left-hand paths, light and dark magic, wherein ritual exploration of the monstrous is taken for granted rather than shunned, denounced, or denied, there emerges an alternative notion of the apex developmental end state of wisdom and developmental work. This alternative vision is sometimes known as the secret chiefs. This means a post-illuminated network of active agents using transpersonal consciousness as part of a larger game to change the world in tandem with non-human intelligences and to bring novelty into the cosmic order. It is supposed there might be multiple networks with different agendas, and these networks might include ipsissimi, the plural of ipsissimus, post-Buddhas, and trans-Christs, individuals so permeated by the supreme transformational possibility that they cease to be comprehensible or even perceivable to the conventional psychological spectrum of human beings. And I do not just mean that these senior teachers do some crazy wisdom moves once in a while, like a saint who gets drunk one night and makes hilarious jokes that reveal everyone's egoic vulnerabilities. I mean that this prompts us to imagine much further, to suppose that these figures might no longer even be detectable by any of the signs that we have socially trained to look for in our saints or in other people, They might not even be detectable by normal cognitive and perceptual processes at all, and exhibit an extreme uncanniness. MacGregor Mathers, who famously founded or refounded the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, is said to have received instructions from a couple of these secret chiefs. And his descriptions of these encounters read more like a UFO abduction than any beatific luxuriating in the compassionate bosom of the cosmic heart. He got nosebleeds. He felt like he was getting electrocuted. He couldn't quite look at their faces even when he tried. There was temporal distortion and physical upset. Now, whether these stories are real or not, they point to the inclusion within Hermetic lineages of a notion of a higher development that drops off the conventional human game board at its apex, does not merely reach the stage of the all-loving world Messiah, but either passes beyond that or follows a different fork in the road to become something truly transhuman. All right, there's a lot more here. I'm going to skip ahead. And I want to say at the end of this section, this apex appendix on the use and abuse of Hermetic lineages, I list 11 key takeaway points that we learned from the examination of these movements. So one, we learned that over the course of so-called Game A history, there have been frequent organized attempts to resurrect primitive shamanic culture and integrate it with literal, rational, technological culture and sustain that in the face of threats from long-range cultural transformation of civilization to keep high degrees of wisdom possibility alive. Two, these movements have frequently been socially progressive relative to the background society. They are more explicitly open to shadow work, imaginal training, and transcultural comparison of psychotechnologies than are largely accepted in positivistic wisdom religions. They have experimented with developmentally based social architectures and repeatedly observed some of the obvious failure modes of those attempts. They have often found political inroads to the power structure of their age. They have been able to fluctuate between protectively clandestine and publicly available states, depending on the fluctuating needs of the dominant social ethos. They can operate between and across and within different sets of religious symbolism. They contribute additional possibilities to the conceptualization of the telos of wisdom and existential maturation in human beings. They have improvised the use of ritual as an initiatory technology apart from the conventional and perfunctory official religious and esoteric customs of the dominant society. They are disguised and to some degree excluded from the legitimate investigations of the surface society by virtue of the affect of the uncanny itself, meaning that their social countercultural status and dark mystique creates an uncanny veil, and their use of ancient tools of the grotesque and the ambiguous are placeholders for psychoactive engagements that self-protect with a hidden weirdness. Their imaginal dialogos with non-human quasi-intelligences implies a murky realm of other things, which is triggering for many people. They have safeguarded ordeals. They have safeguarded psychedelics. They have safeguarded the potential of nonlinear formal resonant effects, astonishment, inverted symbols, weird entities, weird states, and weird sects and weird practices at the threshold of the monstrous. And that the key element of what they transmit is a participatory capacity, not a set of knowledges. And that this participatory capacity involves the use of the will and something like an increasing competence at utilizing and relating with the unknown as reality and as ourselves. So those 11 presumptions about what occultists are and what they've been doing over the course of history, how they structure reality and how they structure developmental practice, that informs and is like the secret skeleton of this book. Yeah. Okay, that's all I wanted to read.
Fantastic.
Otherwise, we'll be here all day.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. There's so much in there, Layman. And I think before we open it up for other people to join in and ask questions and do the thing, I have like 2-3 questions maybe to dig a little bit deeper in what you just said, namely, the idea of occultism and hermeticism being, kind of inherently Western. in a sense, because you mentioned this, there's, the Christianity with Protestantism and Catholicism, and kind of running parallel to it was always, this occult, hermetic, alchemical, way back, like Mitra's cult kind of interpretation of spirituality. And so it's a kind of inherent Western kind of thing. And so the discussion that I always have with people is the question, if we as Westerners, if this system of Hermeticism or occultism is specifically suited to our Western mind, more so than maybe Taoism or Buddhism or all these Eastern kind of methods and spiritualities and religions that came flowing to the West like 150 years ago. So is occultism not perfectly suited for this Western kind of Faustian achieving kind of spirit that wants to do something in relationship to the more passive kind of Buddhist kind of approach?
We can certainly draw relationships between the way we think of the modern West and the way we think of this particular form of wisdom development in terms of the affirmation of individuality, the encouragement to change the world through a form of technology, these sorts of things. But I think it's more complicated than that. I think any population, any sphere of culture includes all different types of people, right? So in what we call the West, there'll be some percentage of people who are instinctively aligned with more of a Taoist framework, and some people who are instinctively aligned with more of a magical framework or something like that. One of the things I think we see is a tendency to conflate the West with modernization. Right? We have a particular way that modernity unfolded in the West, and it spread to the rest of the world. There's other ways that thing started to unfold at different moments and in other different cultures. But I think the correspondence is more between the modern soul and the esoteric, and that the esoteric practitioners and the magical lineages were kind of culturally advanced relative to their time and place and exhibited more of these contemporary characteristics. But we do see them. And I think we see these kinds of distinctions within cultural fields all over. I think different Mesoamerican approaches and different Asian and different African approaches would all show some of those same differences between individuals.
Right. So speaking about integral, because like we're preparing course, integral for idiots. And in this context, I was thinking, is integral really a philosophy, or is it secretly a hermetic kind of offspring? Because you were talking about the grades, no? And then you have, of course, you have the stages of development, and you can roughly align them, and you can, and it was always part of the Semitic traditions to basically steal from other cultures and doing these kinds of meditation techniques, and Wilber does this, of course, also. And so the question is, how related in your mind is integral to these Hermetic occult lineages? Like, how indebted is Wilber to these lineages?
Very much in some ways, right? Particularly a lot of the people that Wilber draws upon are very indebted to these lineages. So that both the spiritual figures and the philosophers that Wilber is most drawn to and draws most from are very often people who we would describe as alchemical in their temperament, right? Who have a deep interest not only in the spiritual, but also in the rational, and also in changing the world somehow and keeping a full spectrum of possibilities for human experience on the table. I don't know that Wilber has been particularly focused on these things himself, but I think they are sort of baked into everything that he's drawn from. But the other thing we see is how the lineage of the occult moves over the course of history, right? If we start at some kind of prehistorical shamanic body of knowledge about how to unfold certain capacities and insights in ourselves and as communities, and it goes underground, it's frequently broken, right? It's not a continuous lineage in which somebody has a body of knowledge and passes it to the next person and to the next person. There are long periods in which there's a fallowness or a gap between these things, where the young, aspiring alchemical thinker and occultist has to go and sit in front of the pyramids by themselves, not knowing what the message is, not being able to read the hieroglyphics, trying to provoke their subconscious to reinvent the characteristics of the occult approach within themselves. And so it kind of pops up like the mushrooms out of the mycelium. You don't see a chain between all the mushrooms from season to season. You see them appear and disappear and appear and disappear. And when we see people like Wilbur, like Jung, like any of the contemporary people who have a philosophy, but a very strong kind of magical and alchemical set of mental tools, from focus, from will, from subtle bodies, from stage-like development, from the need to change the world, all those sorts of things. They're just more people in the lineage of these mushrooms periodically popping up in a way that forms an underground chain of transmission that we find in our culture in a certain way, but you find it in the other cultures as well, I think.
So how would
now,
you
the interesting question would be whether there's that Integral operates as some kind of secret collective spell. And how well they're doing with that.
Well, I think you should be able to answer this, huh?
I think that they are. I think that people are not drawn merely to a philosophy and not drawn merely to the idea of transformational development for themselves and the formation of new communities. All of that's important, but people are also drawn into these systems out of a wish to change the world historical situation that we find ourselves in. There's a collective prayer, a collective spell-like working that's going on. And it could be going on a lot better, right? One of the things we tried to do in the course version of this book was to have everyone participate in a kind of magical working meant to increase the resourcedness and potency of the field that we're all working in. But I think the main thing has got to be how rich, how powerful the subconscious, so-called magical body of the individuals involved is, right? If everybody had 4 or 5, let's call them grades or degrees of intensity of their subconscious capacity increased, then the collective spell, the collective hope that we're working on would be massively increased in its likelihood of unfolding. If we remain relatively superficial in our being, then as rich as we are in our consciousness and knowledge, the spell we're working on together is unlikely to manifest.
Right. So, okay, so that leads me to the next, maybe the last question. So where would you locate, Zajic, that, way of interpreting magic as you do, or occultism nowadays, contemporary occultism? Now, where would we locate that in the broader meta-modern field of spirituality? Does, in your estimation, will that play a role, or is that something that also will run parallel to the more obvious, to the more apparent manifestations of spirituality? Like where do you see that?
We're going to see a bit of both, right? And there's a practical aspect to that, which is in any given space, the people that are more interested in the shamanic and the occult version of practice, they have moments where they're going to drop away from what everyone else is doing and try to get into states and undertake different modes of communication and action with each other, try to call on different sorts of sense-making resources and agency than everyone else is. So there's a natural element where it occludes and protects itself, right? It's not a cult merely because someone's enforcing that. It's a cult because a lot of people are not sure about it and don't necessarily want to participate, and some people are very sure and want to participate. So there'll always be a little bit of a countercultural element to it. But what I think we can see and need to see is much greater integration between this aspect of the metamodern spirituality, integral spirituality, the new wisdom consensus, and the rest of them. There are, like I've mentioned before, and one of the reasons for these courses and these books are my many conversations with John Vervaeke and my sense that a lot of the open questions he's looking at in terms of what the current version of the religion that isn't a religion can't yet do has been answered, has been experimented with in these occult and esoteric lineages, right? There's elements of what this way of doing it has to offer that the other ones don't have. And there's not going to be a really rich and catalytic effect until these bodies of knowledge are brought together. The emphasis on the unconscious, on energies of sex and death, on the building of the will, on the use of knowledge we don't quite understand, the development of transontological agency. All these sorts of things are sitting in this particular version of the network, and it has to exchange with the rest of the wisdom network so that the occultists can become more reasonable and more stable and wiser in some ways, but that the rest of the wisdom commons now can become more energized and multifarious and lively and aligned with what the shamanic type of approach has been doing under the surface of civilization this entire time.
Yeah, it was quite interesting to see Waweki talk about his first interaction with what was Hermes or Mercury.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
that was very interesting because that's I don't want to say entry level exercise in occultism, but for him it was like, oh wow, that's interesting. Like how do I even frame this? How do I understand this very phenomenon? So I think if there's a way that these different traditions can inform each other, they will benefit both, basically.
I think so. And I think the advent of new scientific and philosophical approaches really opens that possibility up, right? If we were just looking at a collection of Christian and Islamic and Buddhist and Jewish mysticism, then I don't think there would be as much openness to the occult as we're seeing now. But the fact that there's a new way of thinking that's very neurologically oriented, very cognitive science oriented, it opens up a set of functions for human development. And those people can look around and go, oh, there's actually a bunch of different ways that these functions get instantiated. And there's no reason for us to put some of them off the table, because these cognitive scientists, they're not embedded in a tradition that wants to marginalize and exclude some of this weird phenomenon. They're explorers, and this fits with their exploration. So I think they provide a tremendous opportunity for this more esoteric material to become integrated with and synergize and catalyze the other wisdom traditions, which I think they need. Otherwise, they become just introspective, contemplative, virtue-oriented collectives, which is great. We need that, but they don't become transformers and world changers, which we also need.
All right, fantastic, Layman. I think we open the conversation up now, because you mentioned something that I found very interesting. Because maybe, to close this whole thing off. So you said something about integral, right? And that there's a sigil or a spell working why people still find that interesting. And for me, that's amazing, because after 30 years, that is an amazing run for any given theory, right? So it's like not even Leary and Wilson and these people had they had like a decade maybe where people were kind of zoning in on this. And so I got in contact mid to 890s with integral theory, and you told me it was more or less the same with you. So that's an amazing run, So Wilbur, it comes all from an age where it was like pre-Facebook and pre-YouTube and all of these things, and it grew out of this book kind of environment into an online kind of thing, and it still has a lot of attraction, and the interesting is it still has attraction, although we know now what kinds of limitation it has and what kinds of faults it has and mistakes it has, and so but it's still buzzing and booming. And so in this context, we're doing this course on integral for idiots now, right? So maybe in this context of of the hidden attraction and what you want to do with this course, maybe you say a few words.
As for this course that's coming up, yeah, it's been really remarkable how well Integral has done so far, and also what its flaws are. And what we want to do is do a very interesting version of introducing people to the basic ideas of the integral philosophy, while also unfolding and being very straightforward about what its flaws and limitations are, and giving a vitality to it, understanding that there's new ways to talk about it. There's different moods, different attitudes, different spirits we can bring to that. And a big part of that is how do you also instantiate these different kinds of ideas? Because one of the things that I'm focused on very much that pertains to magic, pertains to the Gurdjieffian stuff, pertains to integral as well, is the emotional and physical embodiment of integral. So it's done terrific, but mostly it's done terrific at the social and intellectual level in giving ideas that are useful and in bringing people together as part of these extended meta-theoretical and liminal networks. But what it hasn't done a great job is figuring out how people themselves can combine values into more integrated hybrids in their actual lived experience. Right? It's one thing to say, okay, I see that there's some partial truth in all these directions. And then it's another thing to actually see that. And then it's another thing to figure out some way, some structure, some description that actually combines different values into one. That's all pretty good. But how do you actually live it, right? How do you have what are the practices and what are the mechanisms by which something you value and something else you actually value? Like if you want to have a snack, but you also think you're snacking too much, you really value both of these things. And you have to bring them together and hold them, right? And be sort of in the witness position and let them struggle and not reduce them one to the other, not quickly bypass it, undergo the rigor of allowing yourself to be the thing that integrates the energy of both the validities, both the values, both the perspectives. Keep allowing them both to be true and allowing that to change you. So I just wanted to mention that because for me, that's one of the most important things that we will hint at and do some practices around in the series is how do you really be a person of more integrity? How do combining perspectives become more of a lived reality that produces a more whole, more integrated individual and not just a more whole, integrated worldview? But we are going to look at the worldviews. We are going to look at all the basic chunks that Wilbur brought forward in a really interesting way. We're also going to unpack them from Wilbur's framework, look at their flaws, look at other ways we can put them together. And also, it's going to be a very strange, fun, carnivalesque sort of experience. So I'm excited. And I'm gonna put out a reading list and like suggested links and stuff in the next couple of days for people who want to get a jump on the background.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Yes, I think we got it. Thank you so much, Layman, for doing this, for putting together this book. Thank you to everybody who joined this book presentation. Wherever you are, have a beautiful day today.
Yep. Thank you to Daniel's snot rag.